Okay, hopefully this audio is good, y'all. I'm in a different location, but I'm so
Yeah.
excited to have today's conversation. Want to welcome Dr. Coefield to the
Woo!
podcast. And I love this because I haven't been releasing like new episodes. And so it's going to be fun for you to be our first one back.
Oh,
So
wow. That is an honor.
welcome.
Yes.
Take a few minutes, introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, a little bit about you.
Yeah. And I can do some like sideways ratchet stuff sometimes. So I trust you'll edit out whatever needs to be.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, Bryce Coefield, use he him pronouns. Originally from Los Angeles, born in the Valley. So if you're from LA, you may be like, oh, he's from the Valley. That's not really LA, but yeah, grew up in Northridge, lived through that earthquake, had to get out with my family. And now I live up in Oregon, work at the Oregon Department of Education as the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Steward. Have a wonderful partner named Carrie, two wonderful children named Kyrie and Eli, who are 4 and 1. And they are life. They are everything. They're what brings me joy and laughter, and like also what like causes some of the most stress and sleepless nights. And so I share a lot about them because, especially as it pertains to the dissertation, a lot of like my process has been in trying to figure out how I can like be a better human being in general, but more specifically, like how I can be a good partner and a good father. Are two things that are very close to my heart. And so, yeah, they are a big part of my life. There are other parts of me as well that may or may not come out, but I'll pause there because we only have so long
Yes.
together.
Listen, and I would say that is one of the things that I first learned about you, just how family oriented you are. And
Mhm.
is to this day and beyond will be one of the things I always love about you because, this process has a way of telling folks, oh, you need to separate yourself from the family. Like
Mhm.
you can't
Mhm.
be an involved family member in order to be doctor. And I just
Mhm.
love how you have served as a model, a possibility model for others of no, you absolutely can put them first and
Yeah,
become a whole doctor.
absolutely. Yeah, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that, Marvette, and you've been an incredible support and encouraged me and I know others to be able to
Mhm.
figure out how to find that balance and encourage us in that way. I
Yes.
appreciate that about you.
I think it's
Mhm.
funny. I think people get shocked. Like one of the first questions that I ask, especially if I know your partner, is like,
Mhm.
do you spend time? And now, especially my business clients, I'm like, and how often do you have sex with your partner? It's
Yeah.
not that I'm trying to be in your business. It's just that I know that the
Yeah.
strength of that relationship, right?
Mhm.
Everything comes from that. And if that's off, it doesn't matter
It
what we
is.
coach on
For sure.
strategy wise, like your
Yeah.
center, your foundation is off. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's funny. So we
Mhm.
so we came into each other's world in 2018. And how I know that is because I
Golly.
remember where I was living. I was living in Milwaukee and I had just moved into my apartment and I was like, I'm gonna press the gas on increasing one-on-one clients. So I didn't even have a group or anything. I was
Mhm.
just like really newly coaching. And I can't
Mhm.
remember how we got each other's
So
information.
I do remember. So
Okay.
I was trying to figure out like like methodology and what I was going to be trying to do, and I had a completely different dissertation topic. So
Hmm.
maybe we'll get to that. But I was trying to figure out like what method felt like aligned with like my body and with ancestral wisdom, even though I didn't necessarily have that language. And I think like you had just not recently finished or whatnot, but you had done sister circle methodology. And I don't even know like where it came about, but it popped up and your name is associated with it. And so then I like went down this rabbit hole of things that you've been quoted on. And then, you like started this thing. I was like, well, let me just like email this person and reach out. And it turned out like you're doing a coaching thing. And I remember, yeah, reaching out and like in great humility being like, would you take me on? Because at that time, it seemed very much like it was meant to support other Black women in their doctoral journeys. And, I wanted to really honor that space. and felt like, the least I could do is just ask and see if I could show up, and also trust your judgment of me and your own agency to draw barriers that or boundaries that needed to be there, or invite me in. So I'm grateful that you invited me in.
That's so funny. So like timeline wise, right? I would have graduated May of 2017. I believe we were talking like spring of
Spring
2018.
of 2018. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
which is funny because I tell people all the time, like, you just have to show up and put stuff out there and trust that someone's gonna find it and want to work
Yeah.
with you, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't even get on that call asking me necessarily, like, prove to me how long you've been doing this and all of your receipts,
Mm-mm.
right? Like,
No.
but and right, I was like, yeah, I could absolutely help you. We had a conversation about sister circle methodology and who that's for and how you
Yep.
want to think about using that. But I remember because this is funny now to think back, is like I was so nervous for our
Mm.
call, and I remember like
Mm.
writing out all these notes of I could say this and I could say that. And none of that even came to mind once we got on the phone. I just
Yeah.
felt really comfortable and it was just a very organic conversation.
Mm,
I think that's
mm,
really
mm.
funny.
It does.
Thank you,
I know.
Coach.
Now you're here.
Yes.
Woo.
And this is a side note for folks. Like, this is what I'm saying. Just start your business because you
Mhm.
will learn, you will get better. So
Absolutely.
walk us through like what were you thinking in terms of what your project would be and why you felt like you needed maybe some additional support at that time because you have an
Yeah.
amazing chair, because most people will come to me and say, well, I have an amazing relationship with my chair, my advisor, why would I need a
Hmm.
coach?
Hmm.
And as someone who has and will continue to have an amazing chair because they think they get rid of us, no, you don't ever get rid of ever.
No, 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 no.
But yeah, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. So Dr. Tabitha Jones Jolivet is my chair. She's phenomenal. Absolutely. You got to witness, some of how she shows up and encourages others around her to show up with love and with hope and living out, right, a lot of freedom. So yes, she is phenomenal. And part of what I had recognized after getting through, coursework and getting through comps was that I didn't have no, I don't know if that's necessarily true. What I want to say is like I didn't have the discipline or the structure to hold myself accountable because there's a lot of life going on, and I'm having kids and moving jobs and all like a whole bunch of different things going on. And so it becomes really easy, I realized, to reprioritize other things, like legitimate other things, right? Like prioritizing kids is a legitimate other thing to prioritize, work,
Mhm.
all these things make sense. And at the end of the day, I knew that if I was going to like actually finish, that I needed to engage in community and get caught up in some of that stream, because that's part of what I recognize is when I'm surrounded by others who are also moving and shaking, right? It becomes easy
Mhm.
to follow that momentum and that energy rather than feel like I'm having to do it on my own. So that was a big part of it. The other part, and this might come full circle eventually when we talk maybe more about my dissertation, but I also recognize, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but whatever, that like I believe deeply in community of accountability, right? So not just accountability for like the discipline of doing the work, but also like what I was engaging in. And so the community that you had formed were some dope ass scholars doing good work. And like, if we're being real, like other Black women. And I was in a spot and I was like, damn, like this is a dope group, and I see them holding each other and loving accountability with what they got going on. And I'd love to belong to a community like this. And so I seen what you're doing. I was like, please let me in. I need help.
Yes, that's so funny. And the running joke that we had for a while is like,
Mm,
so yes, to your point, for cishet men in
yes,
particular, cishet
yes.
Black men especially, do not
Mm,
survive in a group unless they are
mm,
comfortable being in a community that is centering Black women. And there
mm,
was like this joke running, like you and Dante of like I think y'all just come here to be yelled at. Like for a while, we were like, I think they just come so that we can yell at them because there's something happening. But it's all in love, right? It's like no
Mhm.
one's like like a firing squad. That's very violent, but I'm saying that on
Mm,
purpose, right? It's
I got you.
all wrapped in love. It was all wrapped in like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? We didn't tell you to do it. What are you?
Hmm.
I'm gonna call you at 7 a.m. to make sure you do XYZ. Like
That's right.
it's a like I want to use this, but like this other
It is.
mothering, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is
Well, it's his act of love is how I
mhm,
experienced it. Right? Like you and
mhm,
Clea and others, absolutely. Like remember the first time I was like, oh, maybe I'll do sister circle methodology. You're like, nope. Like it was not created for you. And so, in a very loving way,
mhm.
helping sort of orient. And I, yeah, I was deeply appreciative. And at times, like if I had to show up to help be present and, at times represent like a type of face or being that needed to get yelled at, that's what it was. That's just what it was. And it's okay.
It's a good time. It's very family oriented, and I tell people all the
Mm,
time that the words won't do it justice in the
yeah,
community that has been
yeah,
created.
that's right.
And it's not by no means am I taking like sole credit for it either.
Mm,
But people are like, well, I don't need the community. I just need you to tell me what to do. I'm like, no, you need the community because you've never
yep,
been in a community like this.
that's
You've
right.
never
Absolutely.
most likely probably haven't felt seen or heard in this
Hmm.
way. And I could try to
Hmm.
explain it to you, but you have to experience it and then it will make all the sense in the world. And so I don't know
Absolutely.
if you have anything that like you would even offer to that for folks.
Oh,
Just
100%. Absolutely. I think when I was, yeah, going through, I think Wednesday evenings were the sort of like collective gatherings and very much to your point, going in, I think I was initially drawn more towards the one-on-one coaching, right? I think like, okay, this person can help me stay on track and in line and help me walk through things that were still unclear. Like I had no idea how to like write a lit review and all this other sort of stuff. And so there's the technical dynamics I know I needed, but it became very apparent early on the community part was what was most valuable, where folks are checking in, right? I graduated, well, will graduate this coming July from Azusa Pacific University. And I know you were at University of Georgia. So maybe University of Georgia department is different, but ours is whitey white, white, white. And so there were not very many of the spaces where I was around the folks of color, specifically Black folks who were along this journey. And so communally, to have someone else share something that they didn't even know I was going through was very affirming, right? When in a number of spaces, again, not my chair and advisor, but the program I was in, right, would directly or indirectly gaslight would probably be the best way of describing it, right? So, give an example. I heard a lot this idea of like, good dissertation is a done dissertation, which is probably like somewhat true. Like, you have to get it done, and like I had sensed in my spirit that this was a process that could, if I give it the time and attention, that could lead to like healing and like help disrupt generational violence and trauma that I had experienced and that like my folks that have come before me had experienced. And so I felt like this could be a really sacred journey. And hearing other folks talk about what they were doing was like really dope work that also carried with it a weight, a good weight, but a weight nonetheless. And so hearing people talk about it like affirmed what I was feeling, and I didn't even know that I needed that. But it was really helpful. Mhm.
yeah. I was just someone asked me this question earlier today of, what if I'm in a group and the person you're talking to that doesn't relate to me? And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, don't you worry. I will ensure that everyone is involved. And I was like, 9 times out of 10, you would be surprised that you're listening to someone, and while they may be using the people in their lives and their dissertation topic, your brain will naturally start to compare
Mhm.
it to your life and it will start
Mhm.
to make sense in that way. And that I personally, and I've seen other clients benefit more from watching other people get coached than themselves getting coached. Because
Yep.
when you're in the proverbial like hot seat,
Yep.
you can't always listen in the same in ways that you can when
Hmm.
you see someone else being coached and you
Absolutely.
can hear more. So thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that.
for sure. Absolutely.
So let's talk about your journey of your topic. Where did you
Yeah.
start, and
Yeah.
ultimately where did you end up, and
Yeah.
how is that? Because I think a lot of times people are like, I need to find the topic and I have to stick to it and I can't change it.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I get that, right? I mean, like you're sitting here staring down, I don't know, 300 pages, however much it is of writing, and put this pressure, I should say, I put much pressure on myself to like, this has to be the end all be all topic of something that I'm going to love forever and ever and ever. So yeah, that was definitely a pressure I felt. I initially was looking at Black men college students and their interactions with campus police, right? So 2018, gosh, there's so much going on now that I just go back and look back. Those were, the eras of 45.
Yeah, we didn't even know the pandemic was coming.
Lord have mercy. Yeah, pandemic hadn't been here yet.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Golly. I remember, I think it was 2015. It was Michael Brown. Uh,
Mhm.
I think Philando Castile was around that time as well. So there had been a lot going on in spaces I belonged to. There's, organizing around Black life. And so it felt like this could be part of how I use my scholarship to contribute, and recognizing that in a lot of ways, what we see happening with state sanctioned violence is replicated on our college campuses. I believe there's a case at Yale where a student was shot by campus police, and so there were things popping up. And so I was initially, looking at that, and again interested in meeting with other Black men collectively to talk through some of our experiences. I've also had my own personal experiences with campus police, and so that's where we're going. Yeah, so that started in 2018. Fast forward to 2020. Right. So this is like 2 years in, and you think like, oh yeah, 2 years in, like I should quote unquote be done. Like I said, I like had a kid and moved jobs and bought a house and all this other sort of stuff. And then we find ourselves in this pandemic. And this was before summer of 2020. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting the timing of how this all came out, right? When you had the more sort of public engagement with Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. But anyway, so I remember sitting, this was in February, COVID was just kind of popping up a little bit. Things hadn't quite been shut down, and just felt stuck.
Mhm.
And had actually a really deeply painful conversation with my mom. This is probably longer, sorry, you can cut this out.
Mm-mm.
But
Mm-mm. Keep going.
there are deep ties with law enforcement in my family. And I was explaining, I remember I was in the middle of reading this book called End of Policing, which is very good. Highly recommend, by the way. And I was talking about it with my mom, and she was just like, Bry, you can't write this dissertation. You can't do that work. And I was like, what do you mean I can't do it? Like, you can't tell me what I'm. Of course, I didn't respond to my mom that way outwardly, but inside, here's what I'm thinking. And she was just like, it will tear the family apart. Like, you can't do it. And so I have deep love and trust for my mom, and trust her wisdom. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to
And
do this,
I want to
then
say, yeah, I
yeah.
want to say too, because I feel like that was one of our last conversations after you
Mm,
had that conversation with her,
mm,
and you being like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, there's many things here of, right? Because I think what we were really talking about is this thing that wasn't necessarily being said, like, will I be selling out if I don't do it? Because my
yeah,
mom is
that's
saying
right.
like it's
That's
gonna
right.
tear the family apart. And I was like, no, we also have to take care of ourselves and
Yeah.
research, because not
Mm,
only, right, is it the family dynamic, you're also going to be bringing up your own experiences. And if you
mm-hmm,
haven't had a chance to work through that,
mm-hmm,
like a lot of like I don't want to say it's a mistake, but one of the places where people get in trouble in their dissertation work or research in general is they go into a topic that they're like, oh, I got some experience in, but not realizing like you haven't worked through your own emotions and
Yep.
trauma around
Oh
it. And
yeah.
if you want to do that for the first time while with other participants, like that can get really messy very quickly. And that can a lot of times slow people down from finishing
Yeah.
because you brought up
Yeah.
all these emotions to the surface. And I,
Absolutely.
I remember our conversation being that like, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. You don't have
Yeah.
to do
Oh,
the trauma thing
I
to
had
be
forgotten that.
honored.
No, that's
Hmm.
so true. That's so true. I think if I'm honest as well, like, oh, and this is maybe the first time, definitely publicly, but even talking to someone that I've vocalized this, but I think I also felt a lot of pressure in the spaces I was in to be like that dude doing that work, right? Like I've seen so many other people out here, advocating and demonstrating and applying pressure to the system in needed ways that I was like, well, what am I doing? Like, this is like something I can do, right? And so, um, I felt honored to step in some of that legacy, but if I was honest, also was like there was a lot of other work I needed to do within myself before positioning myself as this sort of, I don't know. Also, can you hear my kid crying in the background? Hopefully not. That's my
No,
son
you can't
Eli.
hear him.
Um, but I wasn't ready to take on that type of body of work. So at that same time, around the same time, there was an article that either had come out or I just seen it come out in the Roots, written by Damon Young, that was titled "Straight Black Men Are the White People of Black People," and I was just like, "Oh, this is interesting. This is so interesting, right?" Because I had up until that point, also been navigating like my own gender and sexual identity in this group of like, how do I show up? Like, what does it mean to show up? I knew some of the rules around like don't occupy all the space, right? But didn't necessarily know how. So this article was really interesting because it started to put into words what I'd felt, which it's a false equivalency. So to be clear, like straight black men are not the white people. It's not the same thing, but there are similarities, right?
It's
In
a
how
clickable title.
it
Yes.
is, it is, right? And there are similarities to how we're talking about systems of domination, how people will tap into those systems of domination, and Damon Young points some of these things out, right? And so it just got my wheels thinking about something that had been stirring in my spirit for a long time. And so I was like, what if I did this? Like, what if I actually looked at like why this is and if I was to use a more like appreciative approach, because I didn't want to fall into the trap of, of publishing, putting something out there that continues to demonize Black men, while also holding us accountable, right, for some of how we show up. So I try to figure like, well, who are folks that are trying to know better and do better, right? Like Mama Angelou talks about doing the best we can when we know better, we do better. Like who are some of the cishet Black men that are trying to know better and trying to do better? And what would some of those implications hold for inviting others into that work? And so eventually that's more or less the topic I landed on. And I remember, and I don't know if we talked about this when we were still meeting, but like I remember thinking, like, can I do this? Like, this seems dumb. I don't know if people cuss on your podcast. You can cut
Yeah,
it out.
I
But I was
cuss
like,
on my
okay, all right. I was like, this
podcast.
is dumb as fuck. Like nobody should probably like 2 years like being into their sort of dissertation process just switch their topic. But sensing from my mom this was necessary, and then within myself like, okay, maybe I can do this. And I'm like, oh shit, like at this point I had already written
Mhm.
quite a bit of like I'd already written my first chapter, already
Yeah.
written most of my second chapter, and I'd already written my third chapter. So I was just
Yep.
like trying to finish up these buckets in my chapter 2 for this previous topic when it all started to go down. So I have pretty much my proposal set.
Yep.
And I just like I needed to shift. And
Yeah, I remember this.
oh,
Yeah, it was a part of that same conversation because you see, I found this article, but this doesn't make sense. And I remember which I say to everyone, the first time you write a proposal is like excruciating. I'm not going to
mm,
sugarcoat it. It's excruciating.
yeah, it's
But
pretty
if someone comes back to you and say rewrite the thing, it will never feel the way it did the first time
right,
because you've
right,
already done it. And it
right.
wasn't like you were going to throw out the entire proposal. You just needed to change some pieces around. And I also
Mhm.
remember there's vaguely having a conversation of like, what could come from this? Like, no, this
Yes,
is not
that's right.
dumb. You're
That's right.
bringing a group of people together who don't have opportunity to come together and talk about this particular topic, right? Like, where do you explore and
Yep.
where do you do it where you don't have to worry about performing masculinity?
And
And
a particular type of
and
masculinity, right? Like
yes.
that patriarchal masculinity that we were
Hmm.
expected to perform. Absolutely.
And I do remember because of course my brain is like, and Bryce, do you know where this is gonna go? Do you know the opportunities that are gonna come afterwards? So I remember because for some
Oh.
reason, 2020, I know what it was. 2020, I was like, everyone needs to have a business. That's when I started business coaching. Because Margaret
Mm.
was one of my first clients, but
Yeah.
in
Oh,
getting
that's
her
great.
started. But that is so funny. But yeah,
Yeah.
so you shift gears.
I did. And it was with great trepidation, right? It was like, this is some shit. Like, I'm not ready. It took me 2 years to even get to this point. Like, am I really? And so I did. And, like I could, if I wanted to take the easy way out, so like, oh, well, like, then like COVID really hit right in like March. So I had all this quote unquote time. But the reality is that there was something that like clicked in alignment that when I was like, this is what I'm going to do, just went. And I wrote pretty much my entire proposal in like 2 weeks. Granted, a lot of, like my methodologies weren't going to change a whole ton. I was still going to be meeting with other cishet Black men. So I didn't have to worry about that piece as much. But a lot of the literature right now was like things that like I was already like somewhat interested in, and like some of the things like I had already read. And so it wasn't, when I reflect back on reading End of Policing, for example, there are things I was like, dang, this is a whole other world. Like I had no idea about this and this and this. And a lot of it was sort of knowledge and conversations with folks that I was engaging with for the first time. This other area in thinking about systems of domination and how, like as cishet Black men, we navigate both like so the simultaneous privilege we hold, as well as being targeted in our racial identity. These are conversations more or less I've been having for a few years. So it was just really aligned, and I know you would always recommend like just like effectively sit down and just write, like just
Mm-hmm.
write, like don't worry about the grammar, the spelling, the prompt, like just write. And I think one of the times when I did that with you, pumped out like 5 pages, and not because like, to be clear, listeners, I'm not that person. Some people are like, oh yeah, I wake up in the morning with the birds and like, drink my coffee or have my quiet time or pray or whatever it is, and then I just sit down and write 10 pages. No, I'm that person that like goes kicking and screaming. Like it takes a whole lot of buildup to cross that threshold to get my ass in the chair. And
Listen, say it
this
again
time,
for the people in the back because I was just coaching someone. I was like, just write whatever comes in your mind, put it on a
mm,
paper. I don't care
mm,
if it
mm,
has
mm,
anything to do with
mm.
the dissertation. And then she comes back 20 minutes later. I'm like, so do you have the page? She's like, no, because I didn't know how to say it. I was like, you were supposed to put that on the page. She was like,
Yeah,
oh, you literally mean just write what I think? I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know what
yeah.
other words to use. So I'm like, tell the people because
Yes,
they think
no,
they're
that's
gonna
what it
waste their
was.
time and
Yeah,
you said 5 pages. So
yeah.
what is that
It was,
like?
I mean, it was part of it was, I remember it might have been you or someone else saying this, that like we already hold like the wisdom within us, right? And I believe that wisdom is a result of our lived experiences, right? It's ancestral wisdom, for me. And so for me, it was getting to a point where like I actually trusted that, that like what I was saying wasn't just bullshit, because Lord knows I can bullshit. But it got to the point where I was like, what to me feels like bullshit on this page are actually like thoughts and opinions and, again, wisdom that has been passed down and wisdom that has been developed as I've lived my life. And so it's trusting that that is legitimate, right? Because all of my school socialization up to that point was like, it's not legitimate unless you cite it, right? And so now it's
Mhm.
this sort of process of like, well, what I want to say, okay, but is that actually like what I want to say? And then if I do say, like, let me go find someone who validates what I say so that what I say is actually true. And that can be like a really convoluted, and if I'm honest, like white supremacist process that again, kind of gaslights and delegitimizes the wisdom of our lived experiences, right, and our ancestors. And so when I got to the point, I was like, I can just say it. And, I'm in a safe space with you and others where I'm not going to be, again, I'd be snatched up sometimes and held accountable. That's true. But that's different than I think a lot of predominantly white spaces I'm in, where they get caught up in like grammar or citation or other bullshit. I could just write free. And once I really leaned into that, like it just went. And again, not without challenges. So again, that was 2020, right? Here we are, 2023. And, I I finally defended. I'm working through revisions. So it's not to say like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like I wrote my proposal in 2 weeks and then I collected data and finished the whole process in 3 months. Like that wasn't it. My story is much more complicated, but it felt aligned and I could feel momentum that freed me up in ways that I hadn't previously been freed up.
It felt aligned and that created momentum. I love that. So what does that look like? Right. Because, for a while there, it was like, finish in 12 months or less. And I do that because it's marketing and people think,
sure, absolutely.
Right. People think they want to finish as quickly as possible. But when you get into the program, I'm like, listen, if you want to go fast, I'm willing to go as fast as you want to go. But my question is, why? Like, what are your reasons for wanting to go fast? And do you truly like your reasons? Like 10, 20 years from now, when you look back, are you going to be excited for the reasons why you want to get done so quickly? Or would you rather be like doing a project, like to your point, that feels more in alignment and you know that you were doing it in a way that honored you, honored your participants, and honored the process?
Absolutely. So to be clear, there are a lot of legitimate reasons to go fast, right? Some folks, you're pushing up on that like 8 year, if you have an extension, that like 10 year, where like, this is it. Like you either do it now or you don't do it at all. And that's a very legitimate reason. I have some folks who have loved ones who are nearing, the end of their life. And, they always wanted, such and such person to see them graduate. Excuse me. And so, there are legitimate reasons like that. Financially, right? Like I don't know anybody in our group that's like really made a money.
No, you're right.
And so it was something like $8,000 a year. I forget what it is, and so there are financial reasons as well that are very legitimate. So yes, all that is true. But to your point, and I think I wrote this, I have to go back and find it if I wanted to quote it, but I remember writing my dissertation again. Like I was told that a good dissertation is a done dissertation, but throughout this process, what I found is that actually like a good dissertation is one that tends to both like our internal and external conditions in ways that provide opportunity for growth and for transformation. And that's what I needed to go through. Without getting into too much detail of my dissertation, which would require a whole other podcast episode, it was very, very close. And I thought initially, like, oh, okay, this dissertation topic will be a little bit further away from my family. And in reality, it was like closer in a different way. And talking about systems of dominance that play out and what that means for our relationships and how we navigate them as cishet Black men. And so I needed to do some of that work myself. And part of that work required conversations with like my biological dad, right? And in talking through stories and interactions he had with his biological dad and some of the lessons that he learned directly or indirectly, and some of the worlds he inherited that he passed on, that I inherited that I do not want to pass on, right? That I want to disrupt for my kids. And so, for me, again, like, going fast in some ways was a goal because I needed to get done, but I chose to prioritize, for lack of a better term, like embodiment, right? Staying in the shit when it was really hard, because I realized that if I didn't, I would probably either write bullshit or just wouldn't be able to write. Like that was what I realized. Like the times when I was most jammed up in my writing was because there were resolved or addressed parts of myself or the relationships that I was still trying to navigate, that not that like I ever got closure on per se, but needed to open myself up to address, to then open up some of the pathways of writing, which is hard. And I didn't always have the like emotional capacity to do that. And so I just wouldn't. And I'd go 6 months because I could
Mhm.
distract myself with legitimate things for 6 months.
Mhm.
But when I finally, faced it, it opened up. Yeah, some writing.
Mhm. And
Mm.
so how did you like what types of internal as well as external supports did you need to face it and restart the writing process?
Ooh. And to be clear, it's also like start and restart
Never
and
start and
then restart
restart.
again and
Yeah,
start
that's what was in
right.
my head. It's like, and keep doing it, right?
And that's part of what it is. It's like
Yeah.
keep showing up, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
so much of life is that like you keep showing up and like you restart, you keep showing up. Oh gosh, I mean, first external, right? So you mentioned Margaret, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Sebastian, as one of your clients. So I ended up working closely with her,
Mm-hmm.
and she was able to provide, like really close one-on-one weekly like calls and check-ins. And so even in, like I said, those like 6 months when I wouldn't do anything, I was still meeting with and talking with her. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's processing, right? So that was some of the external support that I got helped address some of the internal things I was needing to navigate. And so even
Yeah.
though I wasn't quote unquote writing, and that I would say that's another myth is that people think like,
Mm.
oh, like, like you're only writing when you're like sitting down and putting words on paper. That's
Mm.
not true at all.
Mm-mm.
Right? Like there is so much writing that occurs in our minds and our spirits and our hearts as we're working through things. And so
And
yeah,
verbally processing
that's
is
right.
important
Absolutely.
to how our makeup, our histories, our the ways
Absolutely.
through the ancestry, like that we come to learn and know with each other. And I think people forget that when it comes to the dissertation. It's like, oh, that should be
Yeah.
different. I should just be able to spit out pages. Like, nope,
Yeah.
you kind of have
No,
to
not at
process
all.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Or the oral tradition is rich,
Mm-hmm.
right? Within our people. And you're spot on. So meeting with Margaret, even though
Mm-hmm.
I quote unquote wasn't writing, I was verbally processing and would record, do like voice memos, which like you could just easily get transcribed. And it's like, boom, here's like 2 pages of like shit. I thought I was just processing for myself, but was actually part of either, working through my put like positionality, that I could put
Mm-hmm.
in my chapter 3. Or there were some things that I later could pull back into the discussion because some of the questions I was asking myself ended up being some of the same questions that I could pull into working, with some of the collaborators or participants who want to use that language. And so all of it mattered, and all of it was helpful in the quote unquote writing process, and was necessary. So yeah, Margaret is who I would say is the biggest external support. Yeah, it's hard to differentiate external and internal.
But I think about internal, I think about like, so a lot of what I focus on is like mindset, beliefs, emotional management. People are like, I didn't come here for therapy. I came here for the dissertation. I'm like, okay, well, we
Yeah,
can't talk about your writing if you're
yeah.
not, if your emotions are all over the place. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
internal is more along those lines, where external would be
Mm.
like, your chair, your family,
Yep.
Margaret, right? Like people and things outside of you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So in that case, absolutely have to name my family, right? My partner,
Mhm.
Carrie, folks who are partnered going through this process know that like it is a journey for everyone that is involved, right? And for me, I talk about partner, my friend Jason and I talk about partner guilt and father guilt, which is right intimately connected to my dissertation topic. And so there were, yeah, a lot of challenges I was working through in that regard. Internally, that's a really good question. Like, I think for me, like mindset, I know to me, it was never a question whether or not like I had the like ability to do it. I knew I could do it. I knew I could finish.
Mhm.
The question was more so like why, and why am I doing it? And for a long time, that question was really hard because I was in community with other folks that had dope ass reasons for doing it, right? To like be the first in the family to do this, it would position them well for a promotion, like all of these very good legitimate reasons. And for me, I was like, I know I like it was a PhD in higher ed, or is a PhD in higher ed, and I was no longer working in higher education. Like I yeah, would love to make my mom and dad proud to have a son with a doctorate, and they've expressed deep love for me regardless. So this like wouldn't be one of those things like that. And so it was really, I think it was hard for me internally to answer that question, and
Mm,
that jammed me up. And
mm,
when and you would think I would have figured this out a lot earlier. In retrospect, I don't know, I didn't. But
mm,
when it got to, like, it finally got to the point where I realized, oh, like the work that I'm doing is really trying to disrupt some of the generational like harm and violence and trauma, and trying to build new worlds for my kids to inherit. Like
mm,
that was what, for me, it was like, oh, I can do this. Like this is hard, I'm exhausted, but this is what's worth it. And yeah, that was a huge moment for me. And I'm grateful to have gotten there, but it took a minute. And so if there were other folks
mm.
like, I don't really know why I'm doing this anymore, like I initially started because I want to do this, but now it's really not, like that's okay. I would say, like sit with that, and
Yeah.
give yourself grace to not know, because Lord knows I could have done all of the, I'm like dancing or talking and given other people what they want to hear as to why, but it took me a long time to really figure out why I was doing it. And so if that's you, that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why that's my first question. Often the question I come back to with
Mm-hmm.
students, and they get annoyed. They're like, stop asking me why. I'm like, it matters because
Mm-hmm.
you have been out. You think that your reasons are the same for when you joined the program, and they're
Yeah.
not. You're not the
No,
same person.
no, absolutely not.
Right? The reason that gets you started is going to be different to the reason that gets you to the finish line, because
Mm-hmm.
you might start with this very altruistic reason, but at the end you're like,
Mm,
I just want people calling me doctor, like, and
yeah.
that's okay.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely okay. For
Mhm.
sure. For sure. For sure. But if that's just gotta be true to who you are,
Yeah.
right? Because I know I went
Mhm.
through times where I was dealing with some bullshit. I was like, I just need these people to recognize that what I'm saying is legit and credible.
Mhm.
Right. And so those letters after your name communicate or symbolize a credibility. But at the end of the day, even though I said that, that wasn't,
Yep.
there had to be more.
Yeah.
So I had to do that work to figure out what that more looked like.
Because when you're crying, I'm sure you can relate to this,
Mhm.
or you're watching your kids and you're like, oh, the last thing I want to do is go read and write when
Yep.
I want to hang out with them. Like, you're going to have a reason that's going to
Yep.
say, this is not for everything. I need to go finish this so I can enjoy all like the time I want to
That's right.
with
That's right.
them. Um, I want to transition to your final defense. I want to say in many ways, I felt like we were at a cookout. Like, I felt like
It
we're just
was. It
hanging
was.
out with family, because
Yep.
I go to a lot of defenses,
Yeah, I'm sure. I imagine.
and some of them are like, do these people like each other? They're not talking to each other. Like, they're very
Yeah.
serious and
Yeah.
quiet and very buttoned up. And
Yeah.
yours is just like, oh, we just haven't seen each other in so long. Who got the music? What? Who's
Yeah.
like, and like, even your committee member being like, what do you
Mm.
say? Like, you like a member of R&B group, or
That's what. Yeah,
like,
you said. Yeah, look like R&B.
it's
Someone
like,
said back
it's
here looking like
so
genuine.
yes. It was a great time, and it was beautiful in the way that your chair came in and set the
Mm-hmm.
environment and the intentions, and it
Mm-hmm.
was just so beautifully done. And I guess from not if you had some time to like reflect on that, because I know if you're
Mm-hmm.
nervous, it's hard to be in the moment
Yeah.
probably, but I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess I would love to know your take on what that was like. Was it
Yeah.
what you expected when you first got
Yeah.
started in this process?
Oh, yeah. No.
And
Yeah.
how did you experience it?
Oh, great questions. I mean, so to answer your question, it is absolutely different. It was 100% different from what I expected, right? And part of it's because I didn't really have anyone, like in my family, who could tell me what to expect. And if I'm being honest, even like a lot of other friends and other folks who had gone through me or gone before me and gone through this,
Yeah, yeah.
um, didn't I don't think weren't given the same sort of freedom to create the
Mhm.
type of space that they wanted to show up in, right? And so there are a lot of expectations put on how a quote unquote defense goes and what it looks like, and a lot of those expectations fall into the same sort of traps that we do, right? And so they end up being very
Mhm.
patriarchal, very white, right?
Mhm.
All this sort of stuff. And yeah, my chair and I from the jump were like, this is not going to be that. Right. Like, dude, like you're not going to sit here and write a whole dissertation about how to navigate some of these traps of domination that cishet men get caught up in, and now like do a defense that falls into those same traps. Like that's not what we're going to do here. And so, I was given a lot of freedom. It's like, what type of space, like what would that look like? I think early on, I remember thinking, oh, well, this is where like you defend. And it's like, this isn't like, that's not what it is. Like I wasn't needing to defend my work because my committee and chair weren't ones that were sitting here attacking my work.
Mm.
I wanted it to be a space where like I could tell stories and share some of what I had learned alongside other brothers, right? Brothers and brothers.
Mhm.
And what some of the implications of that were, and do so in community for a few reasons, right? So one, so that others could also bear witness to some of the work that we had done, but also so that I could be held accountable by community, right? I think one of the I use the word traps a lot because it's one of the frames I use in my dissertation, but I think one of the other traps is recognizing that like Black men just doing work in isolation can be problematic. Like now to be clear, it's necessary. Like we need to do some of this work, especially recognizing the history of Black women and femmes that are expected to do all this work. Like we have to take responsibility, and community and accountability is always important. And so that's what I wanted my space to be. It wasn't a dissertation defense, it was a community gathering.
Yeah.
So we could bear witness, and ultimately collectively, but more specifically, I could be held accountable by community for some of the work that had been done.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of why you got the feel that you did, is because it wasn't just like, this is like my chair and our committee that are trying to poke holes in this work I did. It was like, no, that's not what this is. This is centered around community first. And so we want the vibe, if you will, or the ethos, to use a different language, to reflect that.
Yeah. Oh, that means so many questions I could ask. Definitely going to ask you to come back. We have writing challenge coming up, and I would love it if you have any moments to spare to go deeper into this work.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think folks will really appreciate that. But as we, prepare to end this, there are folks who are listening to this who are really excited, who are looking at you like, wow, you made it. Like, I don't even know. Like, they can't even fathom how they're going to make it to the other side of the dissertation. Are there any words of encouragement you could tell them, or things that like you wish you can go back and tell yourself in 2018, 2019, 2020?
Gosh, there'll be different things at different times, right? I mean, like 20 and 18, 19, there was a lot of life in those years. Well, yeah, maybe to, let's say, like Bryce, who was listening maybe a year ago or whatnot. I think recognizing that it's okay to be where I'm at, which isn't to say it's not where I want to be, but I think for me, I would continue to discourage myself because I tend to compare. I'm very competitive, and like being competitive means I'm always comparing myself to X, Y, or Z. And so I would always be really discouraged. I'm like, oh, there's somebody else in my cohort graduated, and I'm happy for them. And like, gosh, what's wrong with me for not being there? And so allowing myself to just be and breathe and be like, it's okay that I am where I am. And recognizing like when things were like aligned and I had or created space to write, like I wrote, and that was a good process, but I couldn't artificially like induce that process. I couldn't write when I didn't have things to say. I couldn't process things that I hadn't processed yet. And so it's not a linear process, but there are sort of like seasons, right, of like reading and processing and synthesizing and writing, and it's hard to rush that. It's hard to rush that process. And so giving, I think, ourselves grace to be where we are, and show ourselves love in that, and in that form of love also, encourage ourselves to be courageous in taking those next steps. That's the balance, is that love and that accountability, right? Both go hand in hand and are not separate from each other. And so that's what I would go back and say to Bryce, like, you're good where you are, love where you are, and take the next step. And love where you are and take the next step. And if at times it's a couple months from that next step, like, acknowledge it for what it is, hold it, and keep it pushing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, so beautiful, y'all. And for you, like, where does, whether that's a dissertation coach or a dissertation or doctoral community, what words would you tell people about joining that? And then particularly Qual Scholars? I know that was a lot to put my brains.
I got you. Yeah, I would say, I mean, that just for our own growth and edification, like, that's necessary, right? Like, I fully expect to still belong to this group of scholars, even though at this point a good majority of us have already finished. I'm also looking at you, Kalia. We about to get here. We about to get here.
I'm gonna be a whole mess. A whole mess. I'm like, I can't ask a question. I'm just crying. Let me cry.
Yes. She got next for sure. But that community, I mean, it of course, we're coming together for a particular purpose of supporting each other towards finishing this doctoral journey. But when I think about so many other communities and relationships I developed, even though they may be started around a specific purpose, you develop friends and family, right? And recognize that these are spaces that we belong to, where we are cared for and loved and held. And those, I mean, gosh, indescribable, right? Like, and completely invaluable. And so for me, like, that's what I would say, like, get involved. Because especially, like, if people like, I'm good, like, I got my people, I got my spaces, accountability, cool. Like, I wish all of us had that privilege. The reality is that for a lot of us, we don't, especially in doctoral spaces, which continue to be very white, male dominated spaces. And so, I would say, come for the, intention of finishing the dissertation, and stay for the people, right? For the family, for the culture, which sounds so cliche, but that's what so that's what I would say.
No, that's real. Right, which goes back full circle of, like, I cannot describe to y'all the community we have, because it is all those things. You do not have to separate pieces of you to be a part of this community.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, sharing your beautiful, incredible experience. If folks want to follow up with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, this is a good question. I know you asked about socials. I'm like, I'm that dude that's like not on really any socials. I have a Facebook, so you can, like, find me through that maybe. But, like, I would say, send me an email. It's through there, but it's just like bryce.coefield@gmail.com, which maybe feels archaic or whatnot. But
I put it in show notes for the people.
Yeah, send me an email, and I love connecting with folks, so I'd be more than happy to meet through Zoom, or if you find yourself in the Pacific Northwest, maybe we can do an in-person meetup. That would be good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.